Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and otherwise. As is the new norm for Wizards, spoilers are coming at us hard and without relent. With so much to take in, it can be hard to pick out all the winners. But that's exactly what we here at BardStock Hobby Radio love to help our listeners with by endorsing the coolest cards of the spoiler season with the Gilded Goose seal of approval. And to ensure you fine folks aren't presented with only my white player bias, I have a returning guest and member of the playgroup on the line here. You may know him for his rap recitations and diligently detailed play-by-plays on the Monster Pop podcast. He is Dr. Destruction, Ph.D. Say hello, Doc.
Hello.
How have the past few scandal-ridden months of Magic the Gathering been treating you, my friend?
I honestly, some things have been frustrating, but it really hasn't been nearly as bad, I think. I don't know, I'm willing to ignore products like, Magic 30. It's annoying. I know the Secret Layer 30, which we both got. I ordered two. They still haven't refunded me yet. They said it would be like 5 to 7 business days, though. So I'm hoping that gets refunded soon. As tempting as it might have been to, unintentionally scalp it, I'd much rather just actually have like the spending cash in hand for a set like Brothers War, which is a pretty good set actually.
Lovely. Well, to provide a quick Gilded Geese refresher, this is the segment in which soon-to-be-released legendary creatures are acknowledged for their worth in Magic's most popular format, Commander, otherwise known as Elder Dragon Highlander, or EDH for short. Are these the strongest and most game-warping cards? Not necessarily, but they are ones we love for one reason or another, and ones that we believe you, the listener, may just have a blast playing. But before we get into our winners, we should first discuss the cards we were most disappointed with, our Savage Knuckleblades, if you will. What was your selection, Doc?
Yeah, well, I guess first we should kind of, reintroduce the idea of the Savage Knuckleblades, of course. It's named in honor or dishonor of the Khans of Tarkir Savage Knuckleblade, which was deeply overhyped upon the reveal of it. For Khans of Tarkir, where such Magic commentators were saying things such as, "What Savage Knuckleblade will you be playing?" And when the standard format actually rolled around, it was nothing. But without further ado, my one is one Ashnod Fleshed Mechanist. One of two Ashnod cards between this and the Commander deck. However, being in the set and being the feature art of her, and definitely the better art, it is really disappointing how this card turned out. So for 1 black, you get a 1/1 legendary creature, Human Artificer with Death Touch. Admittedly, being a 1 mana 1/1 with Death Touch is kind of neat for a commander. I wish it was not her that got this honor, but 1 mana 1/1 with Death Touches are sort of these limited all stars, right? Because they almost always trade up. They're able to trade for a much bigger creature, able to sort of kind of ward off potential attackers because people don't want to lose their creature. In Commander, though, it's a little bit of a different animal, and I think it's way less exciting. But it's cool having that as a commander. I just wish it wasn't Ashnod. For the rest of her effects, whenever she attacks, you may sack another creature to create a tap Power Stone. Not that exciting. And then you can pay 5 mana to exile a creature from your graveyard specifically to create a 3/3 tapped colorless zombie creature token, artifact creature token. So yeah, she's just not great. This is probably the fourth most important character in the Brothers War behind the brothers and Tawnos. And this card just doesn't really do anything exciting, right? She creates Power Stones. A billion things in this set create Power Stones. A bunch of commanders in this set create Power Stones. And then the fact that her Transmigrants, which are sort of her signature creation, it's really disappointing that they're only represented on this one card that makes them really inefficiently, right? 5 mana for one token is a lot, especially when it's tapped. You can create it at instant speed, but it can't block, of course. And it costs resources from your yard. You don't get to use your opponent's, which I think might have given her a little bit more niche if she could. But overall, I just found this card really disappointing.
Valid criticism. I myself went with Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor, another black card in the set, feature character. Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor is a 3 mana, so 1 generic, 2 black, legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. He's a 3/3, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. And then you can pay 4 generic and 3 black, discard X cards to exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among the exiled cards this way without paying their mana cost. Now, this is by no means a bad card, but for such an important and powerful character from the olden days of Magic lore, it is an underwhelming representation. I can understand the flavor as Gix is a manipulative fellow in the Brothers War story, but I would have liked to have seen something with a more direct board presence since he is hyped up as being someone of tremendous power. But we've definitely come into an age of Magic where major characters are generally getting more competitively pushed designs rather than casually powerful ones.
The first effect definitely very flavorful, right? It's very much manipulating the wars, and I think specifically what you're getting at as far as like the change is like it's in that stat line, right? Being like, is he a 3 and a 4/3 or 3/4 or
3
3/3?
mana 3/3.
3/3. It's like he's supposed to be like the most powerful praetor, right? Like there's the none of the feats from the new praetors match anything he did. Like this dude beat the shit out of Urza, who is actually my my first gilded geese. My gilded geese this time around, definitely not necessarily ranked in terms of power. I actually feel all of these are about the same. Like I feel pretty similarly about them at the power level. It was really hard for me to choose the order, but I went with Urza Lord Protector, the one that melds into with the Might Stone Weak Stone to form Urza Planeswalker. Um, so obviously, there's the vertical cycle for both the brothers in the set. This is the Mythic Urza. I think he's also possibly the most exciting just because of the flip side. But even his main side, right? Like last time I talked about how good I thought Sten Paranoid Partisan was. And here it is, one set later, we've upped his cost by one, and we've given him a slightly more powerful effect in the sense that, when he flips into a Planeswalker, but he makes your artifacts, instants, and sorceries at all time cost one less, right? As opposed to choosing one type of non-creature permanent with Sten. So you get your you get all your Cloud Key fun. You get to have your Sensei's Divine Top Mystic Forge combo. You get to do a lot of things that are pretty powerful. And of course, you can pay 7 if you own the Mightstone Weakstone and exile him. And the Mightstone Weakstone itself, I think, is pretty good as a meld card, right? I think they really went hard on meld this set. It's way better than it was in Eldritch Moon, which only had the one legend, which was Bruna and Gisela or Bracella when they flipped. I thought they were okay, but they were definitely much lower power level compared to these guys. And the Mightstone Weakstone's a cool artifact too. 5 mana artifact. When it enters, you get a modal option of drawing 2 or giving a creature neg 5, which is a pretty potent removal, right? I mean, that probably kills a decent chunk of like the commanders that you regularly see at a table, right? It kills an Atraxa, it kills any number of things, right? I mean, as far as the commanders you personally play, it probably kills most of them under most circumstances, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
But yeah, I mean that's generally speaking, it kills a lot of people's commanders, and then it also taps to add 2 colorless. Can't be spent on non-artifact spells, but it can be spent on that meld effect. And of course, when Urza flips into Urza Planeswalker, his iconic, label, that was how he was just known in the story, was Urza Planeswalker for a long time. 7 loyalty, can activate his abilities twice each turn. Or I think, it's weird because I've seen inconsistent templating on it. Because I've seen a picture of it where it says twice each turn rather than only once, and then I've seen the one where it's reminder text that it can be done twice instead of once, but it's an additional time. So that affects synergy, unfortunately, with cards like Oath of Teferi and Urza gathers the Titans or whatever it's called, or assembled the Titans. The Saga, its final effect. So depending on what the actual printed version is, I know they've been really goofy. A lot of reprints a lot of printing errors lately. I'll have to check the ruling brief to make sure it works one way or the other. But it does affect synergy. But either way, you get some powerful effects, right? +2 is an enhanced version of his static effect, giving a cost reduction of 2 and gaining 2 life of those same types of cards. +1 is drawing 2 and discarding 1. 0 is creating 2 1/1 colorless artifact soldiers. -3 is exiling a non-land permanent. We know that's very good because of Karn, and it's a very good effect. And then -10, giving your artifacts and planeswalkers indestructible and then blowing up all non-land permanents. I think this is really cool. I think definitely he's the most powerful in terms of like the sparking walkers. I think the origin ones have generally been pretty power crept, and I think even like Bolas the Ravager is probably his only competition. But even then, I think he's kind of his direct impact as a walker is not necessarily as felt. Whereas I think the Urza Lord Protector, I think, is going to be a very powerful commander for a lot of decks.
I would agree. So, for my first pick, I've gone with Lauren, Disciple of History. Lauren, Disciple of History is a 3 generic and 1 white for a legendary creature, Human Artificer. She is a 3/3, and with whenever Lauren, Disciple of History, or another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So, I've mentioned this to you before, Doc, but Lauren has some very strong parallels to one of my recent favorites, Heiko Yamazaki, the General. I've had a blast with that deck, and to a certain degree, this Lauren is a plane shifted version of Heiko. There are, of course, going to be a number of differences with the color shift, despite both commanders being really well suited for utility artifact heavy lists. For example, you're going to be short your nifty artifact focused goblins, but she makes up for that with some other compelling tech. Notably, she pairs well with Teshar, Ancestr's Apostle. Since the Loran Disciple of History deck will be filled with artifacts and legendary creatures, Teshar makes for solid creature recursion. Lauren also returns artifacts from your graveyard to your hand, so you can always opt to hold up an artifact spell to trigger Teshar's ability when necessary. And on the flip side, if you're looking to find a way to keep the option of recurring your artifacts available, then Krovak's Ascendant Hero is a great fit. For 2 life, you can return him to your hand at any time. And from there, it's only a matter of dropping him onto the board once again to grab whichever artifact you might need from your yard. You might also benefit from running the rarely seen Blood Clock and or functionally identical, and in this case, more flavorfully appropriate, Umbilicus. 2 cards that can keep your recursion fueled while being an annoyance to your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna add, the Krovax comparison. I mean, like Krovax, I definitely see the synergy there, but you are talking about spamming a 6 drop to recur some artifacts, so maybe a little tougher on that, a little cushy on that price. But I think one thing, I don't know if you mentioned this, but this Laurent's an uncommon.
Yes, she is uncommon, which is another parallel between her and Heiko. So if you're looking to build something a little bit more budget friendly, this could be the deck. We have this is a good point to bring up too that this is the first time that we're doing sample lists for our Gilded Geese recipients. So our sample list for Laron has actually come out to about $80. So not too expensive to build at all.
And you could
There's definitely
definitely
some things
cut
you can
things
take out
down too,
for.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things, like I know you'd mentioned that you were going to do a stricter budget before, but you kind of determined, as we'll kind of demonstrate, there's a consistent theme in most of these decks, and
Yeah, since this is a very artifact focused set,
yes,
especially with the legends, you get very similar lists, and so you kind of have to up your budget to give each one a distinct identity.
right, for sure. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll mention, it's kind of interesting that like Lauren, I thought it was weird that she got 2. I didn't think she was a particularly important character to warrant getting 2 cards. But I'm glad she did because I think both are really good. The other one is definitely more of a utility piece. I think is just being like the same reason Reclamation Sage sees play in like a million decks, right? It's the same thing, so that makes her good. But I think she's definitely a much more lackluster commander compared to this one, which definitely has its own identity.
I would agree with that. So, would you like to move on to your next pick?
Yeah, so and this will be where I kind of note that I actually picked completely unintentionally. I picked a legendary creature from each wing of this product. So you obviously have Brothers War the set. I kind of talked about Urza Lord Protector as my pick for the set, but you have the Commander decks, and you also have the ever controversial Transformers. But my second Gilded Geese is Megatron Tyrant slash Megatron Destructive Force. So Megatron, kind of classically one of my favorite Transformers. Period. Um, Kind of interesting too that there's sort of this weird theme in the Transformer ones where so he's more of an artifact focused Mardu commander, right? He's 6 mana Mardu 3 for a 7/5. That your opponents can't cast spells during combat, and at the beginning of your post combat main phase, you may convert him and add a colorless for each 1 life your opponent's lost this turn, and you can pay 4 um, instead for his more than meets the eye effect to put him in play in vehicle mode, which has living metal, of course, like all the Transformers besides Soundwave have, which makes him a creature as long as it's your turn. And he's a 4/5 in that mode, and when he attacks, you may sack another artifact. When you do, Megatron deals combat damage to sacrificed artifacts mana value to target creature. If excess damage is dealt that way, that damage is dealt to that creature's controller, and you get to convert him. But one interesting thing that like I notice of a lot of these Transformers is they have parallels with other universe beyond slash crossover Magic cards. So Mardu artifacts, the only other Mardu artifact commander is Jan Jensen Chaos Crafter from Baldur's Gate. Another parallel is like Soundwave being like this more token focused commander. That really wasn't a theme in Esper until you had Marnius Kalgar in the Warhammer 40k deck. So it's kind of weird that it's like, oh, here's these like universe beyond sub themes within these colors. But I think Megatron's sweet. I think the flavor is definitely there, right? You know, the tank mode, obviously not something you had in the original show. That's always been a controversy within the Transformers fandom. The fact that he can't turn into a gun anymore, but definitely like the whole sacrificing an artifact. I think it definitely reflects in the original show how he treated a lot of the mechanical tools. Right, they always had a MacGuffin in a lot of episodes that was usually destroyed by the Autobots at the end of the episode, but this is sort of the disposability of those things still inflicting a blow to his enemy. And certainly some of the incarnations of Megatron treat his men as more sacrificial pawns as well, particularly the Starscreams. The other side, right, your opponents can't cast spells during combat. I feel like it's almost a reference to like the sort of honorability handicap that the Autobots impose on themselves. I think of something like the episode Heavy Metal War, where Optimus is fighting this honorable duel with him, but Megatron is cheated by like stealing all of his men's powers. Because he's not stipulated by this. And then the whole like getting the colorless mana is very much kind of tied to like their goal of stealing energy, right? And raiding the Earth and other planets. Overall, I think this is a really cool commander, right? You get to I think the best way to play it, you want to kind of play a card like Aggressive Assault and probably other extra combat step cards. If you pair Aggressive Assault with Chromatic Orrery, you just get to basically just convert him constantly in the same turn, get sort of infinite combat steps. You obviously need to have some way to bring back your artifacts. For that to keep sacking it. Another way to kind of ensure that which is really interesting, to ensure that you always get the excess damage is a card like Forbidden Orchard, which used to be kind of expensive, but I think it got a recent-ish reprint. I can't remember where.
Yes, it was in Double Masters 2022.
Okay, yeah. So it's a fun little mana fixing card that doesn't really see a whole lot of play. So it just taps for a mana of any color, but it comes with a cost of giving your opponent a 1/1 spirit. However, if you want to ensure that someone has like something you can do excess damage to, you can just give someone the 1/1 spirit, shoot them down with his tank mode, and then you've done excess damage. Most likely, you only need to sack an artifact with like CMC 2 or more. Not very hard. And then you get to flip him, do more damage that way because he'll be a 7/5 as opposed to a 4/5. And then on your post made, you'll get a bunch of colorless mana equal to the damage you've dealt. Very similar to a card like Neheb. I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, I think he's a really fun card. The way I recommend the cards I recommend for him, cards like Goblin Welder, Scarecrow, and Skeleton Shard, those are sort of key recursion pieces. I think they're all in your sample list. Maybe not Welder, because it might be a little bit more. But then you also want like cards that have like pretty good def triggers for artifacts, right? Spine of Ishsaw, just something you can sort of keep dumping down, right? And of course you get to play it with the mana that you gained, potentially. Cards that leave behind tokens like Worm Coil Engine, Phyrexian Triniform, and Triplicate Titan. But yeah, that's my second Gilded Geese award. It's going to Megatron.
I think you're bringing up some good points. Also in the sample list, too, another card that I thought worked well with him was a Crowan Horse.
Yeah, that's another one.
So it's going to keep your opponents getting, 1/1s. One of them's going to get a 0/4, but
you probably don't want to. You want to store that one last. Generally,
exactly. Another good one was Iron Soul Enforcer, which is a 5-drop from the Kamigawa Commander decks, the vehicle deck, I believe. Whenever Iron Soul Enforcer or a commander you control attacks alone, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So obviously functions really nicely with Megatron.
So it just completely sets up like a loop if you're able to just, especially if you can repeat combats, right? You can just keep setting it up where you just sack the thing that you bring back constantly.
Precisely. So the Megatron sample list actually came out to around $100. I believe it's $102 exact.
Speaking of the sample list, because we didn't mention the what was the Urza one? What's the price is that one at?
Urza came out to, I want to say 100 as well, 111.
Okay, perfect. So let's hear your second Gilded Goose.
So for my second pick, I also went with a Transformer. Although you were incorrect about one thing, there is another one that does not have living metal.
Oh, right.
But anyway, if you were shocked and appalled by Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp back when Modern Horizons 2 rolled around, and you wanted a better modular commander, then you're just like thousands of other Magic the Gathering players. But don't fret because there's good news for you. Though, if you hate Universes Beyond and you despise the Transformers, then do fret, because the Magic and Transformers crossover has brought you a new modular themed commander, and his name is Blaster Combat DJ. Blaster Combat DJ is a 3 generic, 1 red and 1 green for a legendary artifact creature robot. He is a 3/3 with more than meets the eye for 1 generic, 1 red and 1 green, and other non-token artifact creatures and vehicles you control have modular 1. You may put one or more +1/+1 counter, or excuse me, whenever you put one or more +1/+1 counters on Blaster, convert it. And on his flip side, he has modular 3, and you can pay X and tap him to move X +1/+1 counters from Blaster onto another target artifact. That artifact gains haste until end of turn. If Blaster has no +1/+1 counters on it, convert it. Activate this only as a sorcery. So, Blaster's reverse side is not overly thrilling, but it can be useful as a haste enabler, and it does have some interesting synergies since it can move its +1/+1 counters to any artifact. For example, you can move them to Gavel of the Righteous to quickly bring it online, while also not putting those counters to waste since they will still indirectly buff whatever creature you equip Gavel to. Anyway, I'd like to focus now on what makes him more exciting, his front side. Modular 1 may seem relatively insignificant, but there is a lot to work with from just having a single measly counter on your creatures these days. Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, for example, introduced the modified mechanic as well as a number of cards that benefit modified creatures: Kodama of the Westry, Chishiro the Shattered Blade, and Invigorating Hot Springs, to name a few. Proliferate also became more abundant with the release of War of the Spark, and recent list and secret lair reprints of Contagion Engine have increased the availability of one of the best Proliferate cards while also dropping its price. And there are, of course, Per Imaginative Rascal and Hardened Scales, which will essentially increase your modular value. Artifact creature selection is up to your own preference, though cards like Joyrus Familiar and Foundry Inspector are more than likely something you'll want to include. As for vehicles, however, there are certainly standouts. Fleet Wheel Cruiser comes down with a threatening 6 power with Blaster on the field. Ghost Ark's provision of Unearth to your artifact creatures can help you close out a game, and Thunderhawk Gunship provides substantial value by essentially being able to crew itself and by giving flying to all of your attackers. Our sample Blaster list is priced at roughly $60.
Yeah, I mean, Blaster is really. I mean, the thing is too. That's like the beauty of him is he's actually like really easy to kind of keep cheap because you could only. I mean, as long as you're running vehicles and artifacts, the vast majority or artifact creatures, the vast majority of which are pretty cheap. You can kind of choose your own adventure as far as how much you're willing to pay on this deck, and
Exactly.
following up on your shocked and appalled by Zabaz, I don't know if I would use shocked and appalled, but I definitely thought that was really disappointing. I loved Modular, and it has, not been featured a lot. And Zabaz as like the commander that they gave us in Modern Horizons of all sets, right? One of the most Modern Horizons 2, one of the most broken sets ever made in the history of the game, and this was like the best they could muster for a commander. I was kind of shocked and appalled in some ways. So it's really great seeing them get another shot at this. And he doesn't even need you to run other modular cards. I think it's good if you do, just because it's helps facilitate it more. But I think it's really cool, like just having that commander that just gives everything modular, right? I think it's cool. I really appreciate the work they did on a lot of these Transformer cards, and Blaster's no exception.
Yeah, they're flavorful for the most part, albeit some of them are very clunky, but it is what it is. There's definitely standouts, I would say, from the Transformers.
Sure.
Just real quick on Blaster, this is in the sample list as well, but I think the big thing is Arcbound Overseer, which
Yeah.
at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature with modular you control. It is high on the curve, 8 mana, but it's definitely going to be a house in this deck if you can keep it protected.
It's throwing a Micah Synth Golem.
You definitely can. But anyway, Doc, do you want to get into your last one?
Yes, I chose Mishra Eminent One. Mishra, I think, is really exciting. So, unlike Urza, who had a very powerful magic card that existed before to represent him, Mishra had one that was incredibly clunky. Right, it was this fact that was very much designed to interact with more of a 60 card format where there's no singleton rules, and it made it so you are really dependent on cards like Possibility Storm and other weird things to sort of actually search your deck for a quote-unquote duplicate of the card that you cast. I like that, this one is the other Grixis Mishra Eminent one, of course, and I like that he still sort of like follows the trend of that. So for 5 mana, he's a 5/4 human artificer. That at the beginning of combat on your turn, you create a token that's a copy of target non-creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's Warform, and it's a 4/4 construct artifact creature in addition to its other types. It gains haste till end of turn, and you sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So um, I like that one. He kind of like reflects sort of that replication ability that was on the previous one. Though again, the previous one was through cards. This is more of a commander friendly version, right? He creates tokens, and because of the way he creates the tokens, he's like really cool with what he interacts with. As someone who plays, well, currently it's an Urza deck. It was Muzio, now it's Urza, but and Muzi was actually in the pre-con for Mishra, for what it's worth. But, I play that deck, and it's predominantly a non-creature artifact deck. There's definitely creatures in it, but the ones I sort of lean towards are these non-creature ones that have, like, sort of this feeling of building an engine, right? You're building this factory to sort of guide your way to victory and stuff like that. And this is a commander that directly facilitates that. And it's also kind of neat, too, because it's such non-creature artifacts. You can choose to copy vehicles, and they're like essentially like auto crewed because they're a 4/4 construct now. So it's kind of interesting because like usually vehicles and like the non-creature artifacts don't really meld that well together because kind of naturally there's no reason to run things when you can't crew them. But here you get to do it, and you also get to run a lot of other cool non-creature artifacts, such as particularly legendary ones, because the Mishra's Warform is a different name, so the Legends rule will not apply. And some that have not seen a lot of play, such as Gonti's Aetherheart, is a great example, right? So you can sort of help set up this infinite turn combo, especially if you pair it with like a Panharmonicon. That's going to be really fun. You can also run something like Mindslaver, which is definitely something that I think a lot of artifact players are a little bit more familiar with, particularly pairing with something like an Academy Ruin to recur it. But it's definitely seen less play more recently, and you get to do that here, right? You just have this setup where you're able to just Mindslaver someone every turn. Again, because of the way he triggers on combat. You get to run extra combat spells again. Aggravated Assault probably can quickly kind of cascade itself if you're pairing it with mana rocks that you're sort of animating, particularly like a Gilded Lotus or something like that. But doing that over and over again kind of helps you just build out like a bunch of artifacts, construct copies, things of that nature. Um, I think there's just a lot of fun stuff that you get to do. Of course, because they die on end step, you get to pair it with like a Sundial the Infinite or Obeka to sort of just end the turn, so you get to keep your tokens too. There's a lot of fun things you can do with Mishra. I think this is a really fantastic representation of him. But I think Tamer of Makfawa is pretty good, especially in this deck, right? Because you're able to like unearth an artifact and then sort of copy it again with Mishra to sort of just really go for some really explosive turns.
Well, Mishra certainly did nothing wrong, but I'm going to get into my last pick, Queen Kayla Ben Krug. Queen Kayla Ben Krug is a 1 generic, 1 red, 1 white legendary creature human noble. She is a 2/3, and you can pay 4 and tap her to discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. You may choose an artifact or creature card with mana value 1 you discarded this way, then do the same for artifact or creature cards with mana values 2 and 3. Return those cards to the battlefield and activate this only as a sorcery. Now, Boros has gotten itself another creatively designed powerhouse with Queen Kayla. Her ability not only has high potential value, but it is also going to let you get through your deck very quickly, which is terrific in a color combination that is not exactly known for having much in the way of card draw and deck thinning. If you're looking to run Queen Kayla as a commander, you're absolutely going to want Zerda, the Dawnbringer, to cut the cost of her activated ability in half. And if you'd like to reduce that cost even further, then Heartstone is going to make for another fine addition. Notably, she can cheat out both of these cards with her ability as both are 3 mana. And Old But Gold is Library Lang in this situation. This is going to help you manipulate what you draw from her ability, so if you've got a stockpile of 1 to 2 or 3 mana value cards in your hand before discarding and you don't want to lose them, then Library of Lang allows you to redraw anything you're not quite ready to bring into play, or use its effect to keep anything over Kayla's curve protected, such as Psychosis Crawler, which is probably going to be one of your big win cons. And it's also a 1 mana value artifact, which makes it a very likely candidate to cheat out with her low end. and it gets rid of your maximum hand size, meaning it'll pair nicely with cards that synergize with your commander, like Elhamret's Archive, Mentor of the Meek, and Welcome Me Vampire, all of which are going to draw you some additional cards. Lastly, if you're looking to sink a bit more cash into your build, Crucible of Worlds is going to go a long way, as it will greatly reduce the risk of you keeping yourself off your lands when you're continuously flushing your hand. Now's not a bad time to pick one up either, as it's the cheapest it's been in a long time thanks to the Double Masters 2022 reprint. For Queen Kayla, the sample list comes out to around $100, though you can immediately shave $20 off of that by swapping out Crucible of Worlds with something else of your choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Kayla's interesting. I mean, before she came out, could you ever really envision playing a card like Alhammer's Archive or any other draw synergy in a Boros deck?
Definitely not in Boros.
Yeah, I think she's a really fun card. I'm not necessarily sure I understand the flavor reasons behind the effect, but sometimes that's fine, right? You just get a really cool, fun effect, right? Like she gets you some stuff. She gets you some pretty good value, right? I mean, if you're lucky, you're able to get 6 mana of value into play in addition to drawing a bunch of cards. Obviously, you get to run a bunch of other filters. But I mean, obviously, if budget's not an object, you're in the colors, and she will cheat into play. Dockside Extortionist, Ragavan, all these cards that surely aren't great or anything like that, right? But they all fit within these colors. There's a few others that I was just kind of looking through some of these lists. Compare that with a Glow Rider. I mean, I think you already mentioned Thalia's in the deck. Things of that nature. I mean, this definitely you could definitely build this as a hate bear dot deck,
Yeah,
among
since
other
you're not
uses.
casting things off of Kayla's ability, you're just putting them into play. You could definitely just keep your opponents off casting more than one thing a turn, and there's not really much they can do about it
Yeah,
while you're getting all the value.
Eidolon that does that? I mean, there's Rule of Law, which is the enchantment that does it, but there's from original Pharaoh's block.
Eidolon of Rhetoric.
Yes, Eidolon of Rhetoric. Is that a 3-drop?
It is.
Perfect. So you get perfect synergy with the effect. Yeah, I think that this is definitely, there's a lot of fun ways to build her. I think you could go the more aggressive route. I think you're probably better served with other Boros commanders in that case. But if you just really like her, you want you know your queen to lead the deck. I think it works. But again, you can also just play this much more kind of hate berry control strategy, which is pretty new to something like Boros.
Well, I think that's gonna do it then. Thank you, Doc, for joining.
Always a pleasure.
Yep. Like I said before, be sure to check out those sample lists if you're interested. They will be in the video description. But until next time, folks, keep things excellent.